Good morning, everybody. It's an enormous pleasure to be back here in Japan and making a speech on the very topic that, when it comes to Japan, is closest to my heart, and that's UK-Japanese relations and making them relevant for the 21st century. Now, some of what I'm about to discuss has been referred to already by your Prime Minister and other distinguished speakers, and I make no apology for repeating them, as the message is similar. So too am I in no way limiting the extent to which any relationship can or should develop. But historically, we can see how this has ebbed and flowed. So from my perspective, I want to pose questions and deliberately not comment on some strands of our relationship as they fall outside the remit of this conference. So my first question is, what do we understand about the 21st century? How does it differ from previous centuries? Now, let me try and give you some examples of where this century differs markedly from the previous one, and in particular, how it leads us to examine the way we interact and the way we perceive relations between countries. For the purposes of example, let me just use one: communications. And I would suggest that this is possibly the most obvious. We are now able to communicate and disseminate information and news between individuals and large groups with ease because of the internet, fiber optic cables, satellite communications, and the cellular telephone. Can anyone now remember what life was like before the mobile telephone? It's really only about 25 years ago, and the first BlackBerry devices were only in wide use at the turn of the century, and smartphones have been an even more recent innovation. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Line in Japan, or others, have transformed the way we communicate and disseminate information. And the days of having time to think before having to react to some sort of event or media inquiry is long gone. Not to mention that, for some reason, anything is now taken for gospel truth in this unedited and unsubstantiated world. We now live firmly in the age of reference after the age of deference has virtually ceased to exist. In this respect, we have seen a rise in the occasions when the communications, either between or amongst governments, is compromised. It is said by some that these activities have seriously undermined the ability for governments to function in the manner required to deliver honest and frank comment and advice. This is more through fear that anything that is either said or written down might just one day get leaked. The need for honesty and, to some extent, privacy whilst conducting the great affairs of state by whomever is vital and an important ingredient in good, efficient government. Now, the changes can be shown to be stark and sometimes bleak, but I would suggest all is not doom and gloom. And with the renewed emphasis on cybersecurity, I would suggest that these and other changes we re-evaluate our personal and, by extension, our international relations. How do we manage our national interests and prevent falling out with each other because of a minor slip-up or mistake, or even leak of information? So I would suggest that the 21st century is a different place in the 13 years that has so far unfolded than the previous one. And we must therefore be cognizant of this when we look at security relationships. As this conference seeks to foster a renewal and extension of ties, let me look for one moment at the historical relations between our countries. I suspect few realize that our trading relationship, to my mind the most important part of our long-standing friendship, began as far back as 1600, when William Adams arrived, followed 13 years later by HMS Clove in 1613. And we've had a trading relationship, or a diplomatic relationship, since then. But it really became a thing of substance with the Navy in 1854 at the forefront of our bilateral relationship. And then in 1863, 5 men from the Choshu clan risked capital punishment and voyaged to Britain to learn about the technology that produced our nation's powerful ships and weapons. This was particularly radical at the time, as Japan had chosen to be politically and culturally isolated, and travel abroad was forbidden. The story of their contact with William Keswick and their time at UCL under the supervision of Alexander Williamson is now stuff of legend, as is the subsequent arrival and education of the Satsuma 150 in 1865, also under Williamson. It is a remarkable achievement from isolation to technological power in 40 years. In all this, the Royal Navy has played an important part, and as we know, was chosen by Japan as its model for its own Imperial Navy. The height of these relations was perhaps during the 1902-23 Anglo-Japanese alliance, and as we've heard, next year is the 100th anniversary of the beginning of the First World War, where the Royal Navy and the Imperial Japanese Navy fought side by side in the Mediterranean. And the Japanese escorted over 700 Allied supply ships and suffered a number of casualties who are, as we know, remembered in Malta. So despite being on the other side of the world and culturally quite different, differences I believe we should celebrate, there are many similarities between our nations, probably more than we would regularly recognize. Quite apart from the obvious ones, island nations stuck close to significant continents, constitutional monarchies, historical maritime powers, established democracies, there are others which people seldom refer to. And I refer to our special relationship with the United States, which is as significant to Japan as it remains central to Britain's strategic thinking. But also our belief in a globalized free market and our common interest in countering nuclear proliferation. I would like next to consider the relative position of the United Kingdom in the intervening 400 years and how we see ourselves in the 21st century. The 17th and 18th centuries saw the rise of the empire and its expansion and consolidation. The 19th century was the apex of our empire, and the 20th saw the withdrawal from empire. This new century is about how to make the knowledge that we have gained in that empirical age relevant to today and to work for the better condition of humanity and our country. As well as rejuvenating and re-establishing our closeness and friendships with those whom we either parted with abruptly or sedately in the 20th century, and our relationship with India, for example, has changed now that India is a full global power and economy. The sense of former colonial master is forgotten, and we now have a stronger and more meaningful relationship based on mutual respect and interests. The same is true of any number of countries around the world and Commonwealth. And our relationship with Japan has been long and illustrious, interrupted 70 years ago by a war that, as your ambassador in London refers, we have to squarely face. But since then, the world has changed, and for the better. But however, over recent years, the security and defense side of our relationship has been less well defined. The signature between Britain and Japan on the Information Security Agreement in July, as well as the Framework Agreement on Joint Research and Development and Production, marks the start of a new defense and security outlook for both of us. And I would suggest that from the global geopolitical point of view, with the myriad of concerns in a non-bipolar world, we need to work together in a number of areas that are of mutual concern. In fact, your Prime Minister said only last year, when discussing the increasing issues related to the freedom of navigation in this region, I would also invite Britain and France to stage a comeback in terms of participating in strengthening Asia's security. the seafaring democracies in Japan's part of the world will be much better off with their renewed presence. Resource constraints aside, we do work in the regions with a 5-power defence arrangement, and HMS Daring, as we've heard, is in these waters this year, showing the importance of our relations with you and your neighbours. Asia has always held a fascination for the United Kingdom, and the establishment of Singapore by Raffles as a trading hub it has become, against the wishes of those in imperial India at the time, has been influential in our relations and interests in the region as a whole. After the global economic upheaval of 2008, I've heard it said that the 21st century is Asia's, and the domination of the Asian economies is going to be the most important influence on the global economy and international relations. Our economy was severely affected by the events of 2008, as were many others. But Asia has been more resilient, as this region went through a similar crisis at the end of the last century. And the economic infrastructure has been rebuilt here as we are now rebuilding ours. Japan has an advanced and modern economy, is in the Asian region and has a work ethic like no other. It has been able to withstand the extraordinary growth of some surging Asian economies through education, innovation, and human endeavour. These are, I would like to suggest, as alive in the UK as they are here. Along with this rebuilding and recognising change in the world, we need to look towards friends and allies who have similar concerns and ideals as ourselves. In the case of Japan and the United Kingdom, we have a single relationship that means more to us than virtually any other, the United States of America. Britain has proven repeatedly that it is quite feasible to forge close relationships with a variety of nations without ever questioning that special relationship with the United States. It is not an either-or choice. And I would suggest that because of these special relationships we both share with the United States, we are more suited to working with each other in many areas of global concern than many realise. Again, looking at the UK and Japan for a moment in the light of recent agreements, I'm going to be bold for a moment and suggest that there are two areas where we could rejuvenate our relationship. The first is one of the fundamental requirements of government that I was speaking about yesterday, that is security of our people. The defence and security relationship is an excellent example of an interest that we both share and one in which we both have a special relationship with the United States. The second, I would suggest, is in the area of food, energy and water, in a world subject to the influences of the human being and consequential climate change. But having identified these two, I wouldn't restrict this rejuvenation to just these areas, as with so much that goes on across the broad range of issues that we communicate and discuss. Now, I have seen it in the defence and security area personally. As I said yesterday, right at the end of the last century, I was professionally working in the Royal Navy and I was managing the naval diplomacy desk for a large part of the world, including Japan. And as a major maritime nation, it was high on our agenda for conversations between our Royal Navy and your Maritime Self-Defence Force. The changes that have occurred since the time that I was professionally engaged in the area of naval defence relations is immense. We see a part of the world where maritime events are the cause of concern. We've also seen how in the Indian Ocean, just as an example, piracy has returned to many parts of that ocean and to the globe's oceans. We are now cooperating in many areas of peace support operations, including as a part of CTF 151, in piracy patrols in the Indian Ocean, along with many other concerned nations. But beyond my personal experience of naval staff talks in the 1990s, how different everything is now. When I was serving in the Royal Navy, one of its stated purposes to ensure that global trade could prosper and flow freely, navigating on the oceans. We know the statistic that 90% of global trade goes by sea, and that which goes on out of sight of land is out of sight of most people, and out of mind as well. And we, in our various navies, just got on with it. But now I see global trade flows system as slightly different. I used to think I was at the pointy end of the sword in my helicopter as I patrolled the skies at sea, checking on merchant ships and their cargoes. But since leaving the Royal Navy and becoming closely involved in the development and promotion of British prosperity, I can see how the global economy, its health, sustainability and freedom is central to ours, yours, and for that matter, everyone's. And that the key to this prosperity is the international security of trade and its freedom of navigation, which without our relationships being regularly rejuvenated and developed, then the engine room of this region's prosperity and wealth is at risk. But I would also acknowledge that globalization is a challenge, not only to both our societies and cultures, but is also a challenge to many other nations of the world. Protectionism is in the end counterproductive to the health of the global economy. We all win if we can reduce protectionist tendencies, and an increase in trust and development will lead to sustainable growth and prosperity for a much larger proportion of the world's population, and will also deliver global security. Even with the difficulties that beset the Doha round of world trade talks, I believe it is worth continuing to try to deliver this, as it will enhance trust, collaboration, and trade. However, I would like to suggest that the two nations in question today, Britain and Japan, are well capable of working together to secure all sorts of things in a globalized society, as we fundamentally believe in a free market. But that freedom is dependent on a secure global environment, and working together we can hopefully help to deliver on that mutual desire by working together more closely in the security and defense arena, both bilaterally and multilaterally. Turning to the nub of this conference, I want to develop opportunities for the Japanese to work with the UK more collaboratively, not just in the security or defense sectors, but across a whole range of areas. The UK is the most globalized of all European powers. Our empirical past is key to our view of the world to this day, and our prosperity depends on our trading with the world, as we are an island, and our success depends on our relationships and trading links globally. Equally, Japan, as an island nation, depends on its trading links and relationships to flourish. The UK and Japan, two nations which have revolutionized industrial processes and have previously stood at the apex of high-tech innovation, should consider the fact that we are more similar and we can still do it. Both of us are strong respectively in high-end manufacturing, such as aerospace, pharmaceuticals, specialized engineering, and in cutting-edge research areas such as nanotechnology, cyber technology, materials, and fluids. There are over 1,000 Japanese companies with a presence in the UK, and there are over 450 British companies operating in Japan. And exports from the UK to Japan were worth nearly £10 billion last year. But these figures do not do justice to the complexity or variety. You only have to think of the number of manufactured products today in daily use that could not work without either a piece of Japanese or British technology. This complexity is both an advantage and a disadvantage in equal measure. Whilst we don't know the extent or mix, we do know that there are certain areas of our trading relationship where the logical collaboration doesn't exist in the same way. The defense industrial complex is an example. And as we are here looking at the relationship between our two countries in a security and foreign policy area, I would like to pose the question as to why this is so. After an historical relationship based on naval and maritime links, one key challenge is to get defence and security technologies more thoroughly into this mix of the trading relationship. Defence production confronts ever greater needs to be flexible and adaptive, while the security industry, differently structured, embodies many emerging technologies and new applications of existing ones. And the area we've heard already spoken about at this conference, that of cybersecurity, increasingly the 21st century is being marked by the emergence of some pretty sophisticated cyber intrusions and the removal of sensitive information that doesn't just have national security implications, but industrial implications. There are many benefits to be derived from new approaches to UK-Japanese cooperation in the defence and security spheres, not least in finding new ways of leveraging our cutting-edge technologies. I do not believe that we should allow our individual special relationships with the United States to get in the way of making the world a better, safer, and more prosperous place. And if we cooperate, collaborate, and work together in these and other areas, why can't our special relationship develop and there have an even better one with our continental friend? Might a closer defence procurement link between our nations be a benefit to the taxpayers? They would get excellent products at lower unit costs and possibly for a longer period of time. Might it just be that some of the defence equipment that we both make is better than that which we buy from the United States? Might it be that a little competition in a globalised economy might be healthy? All these and many more questions arise from what I have said, and I hope will stir conversations and perhaps lead to a rediscovery of links and possibilities unthought of in recent memory. There is one caveat in all this, and I would acknowledge that Japan has to grapple with a constitutional position which carefully circumscribes what it can do. Nevertheless, I conclude with the big question remaining. Are we both prepared to embrace the challenges and promises of globalization and to work more intensively together to make the best of our partnership and historically long relationship? Let me bring you up to date with what our governments have agreed recently. In April 2012, in a joint statement by the Prime Ministers of Japan and the United Kingdom, both Prime Ministers, reaffirmed their commitment to expanding defence cooperation as a core element in the future of the bilateral relationship. In June of last year, the United Kingdom and Japan signed a Memorandum of Understanding on Defence Cooperation between the Japanese Ministry of Defence and the UK Ministry of Defence. In this memorandum, both defence ministers identified how and to what extent we might accelerate our defence cooperation beyond the operational to where the Japan-UK defence partnership is more than informal like-mindedness to an institutionalised partnership. In July of this year, we signed an agreement on the joint research and development and production of defence equipment. And under these new rules, this is the first ever treaty which will allow defence equipment cooperation between Japan and another country. And an information security agreement. This is the first government-to-government information exchange treaty which will allow the smooth and extensive exchange of security-related information. Ladies and gentlemen, I would suggest that here are the bones and the skeleton of a new relationship. And I've been talking about, and I for one believe, it is the role for respected institutions and organisations, including the defence industry sector as a whole, to take these very positive indications from government and declarations of intent and build another special relationship that both Japan and the United Kingdom can justify and be proud of as the 21st century unfolds. So I return to my original question. Are we both prepared to embrace the challenges and promises of globalization and to work more intensively together to make the best of our partnership and historically long relationship. Thank you very much.